to a cloud that just floated across. And I'm going to welcome officially Dani Nowosad, who will be speaking about knowledge mobilization, implementing Inuit guidelines for ethical research. Dani is going to be talking about lessons learned about ethical research in the North since beginning graduate studies, and specifically how to implement the Inuit's guidelines within her PhD thesis. Dani's PhD thesis, which you can scan and read about right there, includes how to track biodiversity in Canada's Arctic using DNA. Please join me with your emojis, with your hands, and welcoming Dani, and I will stop sharing after saying, this is your Twitter icon, Dani, and it's awesome.
Thank you. Should I try to share my screen now?
Yeah.
All right, let's see.
See, it's in your head. Whoa, 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 whoa.
How's that?
That's perfect.
All right, I can't see a whole lot, so if anything comes up, if you could just unmute yourself and warn me. Okay, sweet. Uh-oh, I hope I didn't just boot Carl out of the waiting room. You might have to check on that.
I'll go look in the trash heap.
Okay, sounds good. Awesome. Okay, well, thanks for that introduction, Alex. And also thank you for giving me this platform to share things that I've learned in the last couple of years about ethical research in the North and how to implement it in my own work. The first thing I want to say before I begin this is that I'm not here to tell you what Inuit communities need. I'm here to talk about what Inuit communities have expressed that they need and how I've gone about delivering on these needs. Just to introduce myself, hi, my name is Dani Nowosad. I'm Red River Métis settler. My ancestral lineage are the Fiddlers and Hallets. We had scrip assigned to us in the county of Selkirk in the mid-1800s. And my dad's side came from Germany after the war. So my mom's side's Métis, my dad's side's German. And that's how I would introduce myself in community. Of course, this is a different community. So I will introduce myself as Dani Nowosad, a PhD student in integrative biology. I study ecology, specifically the diversity of freshwater invertebrates in the high Arctic. And I use DNA barcoding to understand which species are present. I work very closely with the Centre for Biodiversity Genomics on their long-term Arctic Bioscan project. And I've worked many contracts for Polar Knowledge Canada, who operate the Canadian High Arctic Research Station in Cambridge Bay, Nunavut. So that was a very academic introduction, and it allows you to understand who I am in relation to the broader community of our department, our college, our university, and beyond. So there are different ways to introduce yourself to different audiences that allow people to mentally place you in relationship to other people or other things. And this is going to come up a little bit later in my talk. I wanted to start this talk with details about Inuit written guidelines on ethical research practices. A lot of papers that have been produced regarding ethical research in Indigenous communities, especially regarding Inuit communities, are written by and for quantitative researchers, like mostly social scientists. And I've only met a handful of researchers who have made their careers about ethical research, doing research in a good way, who are physical scientists, because I mean, we have a tendency to go somewhere, collect our data, and then leave, and then do all the analyses from somewhere else, publish our results in academic journals, things like that. So it was really interesting for me to meet physical scientists who take ethical considerations really seriously within their work. So the first thing that had me thinking more carefully about the way I was doing my work in the North was this paper that came out a couple of years ago. And it was a group of Inuit youth from across Nunavut who came together. It was called Ikarvik. And they created this concept called PsyQ, and it's a combination of Western science and Inuit ways of life and knowledge. And they came up with 45 recommendations, and it all stemmed from them asking themselves, if research was completely up to our generation and our communities, what would we focus on? IQ, which is Inuit knowledge and way of life, is not simply traditional knowledge. It encompasses a way of life and a way of knowing that incorporates knowledge, customs, and values. Inuit have been very clear that they're tired of being mined for knowledge about their lands when IQ encompasses so much more than that. And this paper covers what to do before starting your research, what to do during, and what to do after your research. And really, truthfully, this paper made me realize that I was not doing research in a good way, as Dr. Jessie Pop at UofG puts it. More recently, the International Inuit Council, so the IIC, came out with equitable and ethical engagement protocols, or the EEE protocols. And it encompasses 8 major guidelines. And their number 1 guideline was nothing about us without us. And the IIC represents 180,000 Inuits across Alaska, Canada, Greenland, and Russia. And because there's only 8, I'm just going to quickly go through the main headings for each guideline. Number 1, nothing about us without us. And that includes the land. In Indigenous communities, they're not just people separate from nature, the land is part of them. So if I go to Inuit homelands and I collect samples from the land, that's still about them. Number 2, recognize Indigenous knowledge in its own right. Number 3, practice good governance. Number 4, communicate with intent. Number 5, exercise accountability and build trust. Number 6, build meaningful partnerships. Number 7 is all about information, data sharing, ownership, and permissions. That's a whole other seminar topic. And number 8, equitably fund Inuit representation and knowledge. And a quote that I pulled from that publication: every spring, we see groups of researchers coming into our village or town. And this is a quote from Kupik Kleist of IIC Greenland. We don't know what they're about to do, and we never hear of their research results either. They and we would gain in following the EEE protocols. So this is a very clear call for ethical research. IQ, as I said, encompasses a huge variety of things besides just traditional knowledge. And IQ, translated to English, means that which Inuit have always known to be true. And that's a translation from McGill. The principles I have listed here are outlined by the government of Nunavut, and they're listed on the Nunavut Impact Review Board's website. So the main components of IQ revolve around respect, caring for people, fostering good spirit, serving community, family, friends, kin, decision-making in an equitable way, developing skills through a variety of ways, working together for a common cause, being innovative, and respecting non-human life. After reflecting on these papers and these calls for ethical research from people who live in the places that I go to do my work, the questions that came to mind that I had to start asking myself were, what are my responsibilities to the communities I visit, kin, and the land? And more importantly, am I honoring these responsibilities? The answer was no. I'm learning how to serve and honor these communities as I progress in my program. All right, so now I'm moving into the ways that I've tried to incorporate ethical guidelines into my work. My first 2 chapters that I started at the master's level were done in the very traditional, scientific, Western science academic way, where I went to the communities, I did my work, and then I left, and that was it. So to change these things, the first thing that I needed to do is consult. So I had the opportunity to speak to the hunter-trapper organizations from across the Kitikmeot region of Nunavut, and there's a map in the top right-hand corner. The bolded red is the Kitikmeot region. I think there are about 8 communities in this region. And I was given the honor of addressing all of the HTOs from across the Kitikmeot region to speak to them about my proposed Chapter 3 for my PhD. So the consultation included introducing my data set and my idea on how to expand sampling, describing where I wanted to sample, how I wanted to do it, and the people who I'd be working with. And after, talking with all these people, the methods, location, and personnel for this project were all approved by the HTOs from across Kitikmeot. And they made it very clear that they were not interested in one-off studies. So, if a researcher is going to their community and they spend 10 days collecting samples and then they leave and they draw conclusions from that about the land or its processes, they just aren't very interested in that. And I did sit with that for a while, and I thought about how IQ has been passed on and honed and developed for millennia. So of course they're like, what good is 2 weeks of work? Like, I have, thousands of years of my knowledge from my ancestors, and I understand the way this land works, the processes, the interactions, and the way that I fit into it. So yeah, it's just, from that viewpoint, I see how it doesn't make a lot of sense. And one of the most important things that I learned is gaps in literature do not always equal gaps in knowledge. And I've made many mistakes in assuming what is best for the community, even though I know I shouldn't. And mistakes happen. But what's important is that you need to be accountable for your actions. You need to be able to apologize, and you need to be able to move on, learning how to do things better. So again, I just wanted to reiterate here, decolonizing your methods includes never assuming what the community needs or wants. That's where the importance of consulting comes in. It's possible for the community to approve your permits, and they simply aren't interested in a super active role in your work, and that's fine too. I find some researchers who really have good intentions and they really want to make sure that their work is, integrating community members, but you also have to accept when people just aren't interested, and that's fine. And when you do consultations, you have to be ready for community members to give you feedback that would mean changing or pivoting your work. And that's just the nature of doing this equitable, ethical work, and it's something that you need to be prepared for. So again, here's the map of the Kitikmeot region. I've put a star where Cambridge Bay is, which is where I do my PhD work. And these are just keynotes from the 2 consultation meetings I had with community members. So the Iqaluit Hunter-Trapper organization in Cambridge Bay, they reiterated that long-term data sets are highly valued. They asked me to provide continuous reports of updates, results, and final results. So that will mean multiple reports to the HTO. They wanted me to visualize the data in a way that could be handed to an elder and they'd be able to understand right away. And I'll speak a little bit about this later, but they were really interested in the idea of my team posting on this new app called Siku. It's an Indigenous knowledge sharing social network platform. And they also were interested in my team hiring guides from the community. When I consulted all the HTOs from across Kitikmeot, they expressed that they were very concerned about invasive insects or insects that already exist in Canada that are expanding their range northwards. They were extremely knowledgeable about vectors of invasives, different climatic or abiotic variables that could change that would allow insects that say reside in the boreal to expand onto their homelands, and all the risks they pose. Like, I didn't need to say a whole lot because they know they've been there for generations and generations. Like they know more about this land than I ever will. And they requested that I continue this work for 3 to 5 years, which expands beyond my PhD. I wanted to reiterate this because it's so important. Gaps in literature do not equal gaps in knowledge. As I mentioned, sometimes when you consult community members and they provide feedback, you have to be able to pivot your work based on that feedback. And I ended up having to shift a little bit the way that I was doing my fieldwork to better reflect questions the community had about my study area. So in the past, I would go up there and I would just sample from a huge amount of freshwater bodies to try to get an understanding of biodiversity. However, they wanted to know intra and interseasonal variation in invertebrate communities. So that meant instead of targeting all new habitats, all new water bodies, I shifted to resampling old sites. And the reason why I pivoted this is so funny. So I was in a committee meeting with my committee at Guelph, and I was speaking about the community consultations I did in Cambridge Bay. And then in the same meeting, I was presenting my field plans for 2022. And one of my committee members, Carl Cotney, said, wait a minute, you have a chance to address the questions the community asked of your work. Why don't you change your sampling design to address them? And I just couldn't believe that hadn't crossed my mind. And I think that really goes to show how this type of community-driven research is something that needs to be practiced. And also it showed how much I still have yet to learn. So number 1, consultation. Number 2, listening to and respecting Indigenous knowledge. So one thing that the HTO really wanted me to do, and I agree it was an excellent idea, was hire local guides through the hunter-trapper organization in town. And while we were out on the land, they very generously shared observations, knowledge, conditions from the past and present. And I was lucky that they were offered. So if knowledge is offered, that is a gift, and you have to appreciate it for the gift that it is. And as I mentioned before, people who are out on the land all the time, who've been there for generations, they have so much knowledge with regards to that specific region, and they know things that I could never capture. So listening to their stories and listening to their activities on the land, it strengthens research. And so for my chapter 3, for my PhD, which is what I consulted the community about, I intend on braiding knowledge. So SciQ, the Carvick Youth came up with that term, and offering co-authorship with community knowledge keepers or people who want to have input. If knowledge is shared, they will be listed as authors. Number 3 is honoring requests. And this is part of accountability and positive relationship building. Reporting results for me meant delivering hard copies of my report, but like myself, to the hunter-trapper organization. I know that's not always possible, so emailing is okay too, or like mail, snail mail. Following through on requests for information might seem obvious, but it's really easy to just, you fly back home from wherever you were working. It's really easy to forget about these things, but it means a lot to the people who ask you things. So while we were visiting Kugluktuk, one of the young people who we hired to work on Arctic Bioscan asked me if I could share invertebrate identification sheets, because he'd never been exposed to that kind of research before, and he was actually really excited about it. So when I got back, I contacted my colleagues at the Center for Biodiversity Genomics, and I sent him all the materials. And then we also created living documents in Google Drive that we would share learning opportunities or training opportunities in that were based on their future careers. So we were trying to support what they wanted to do beyond what we were hiring them for. And a part of honoring requests is using my knowledge and data set to address community concerns. So when I wrote this community report last summer, a big chunk of the document was addressing questions that the board had asked of me. And a lot of it had to do with invertebrate life cycles, which invertebrates inhabit which habitats, things like that. Number 4 is knowledge mobilization. And as I mentioned, CQ is an Indigenous knowledge sharing application. I would describe it as like an iNaturalist for Northern hunters. And what's really special about CQ is that it was designed by the North for the North. And unlike pretty much every other social media platform, when you share knowledge or information as posts on this website, you retain the rights to your data. So if I post it on Facebook, anything, Facebook will own that information. So CQ is very special because Indigenous knowledge is protected. So to better share what we were doing on Inuit Nunangat, so Inuit homelands, we decided to create a page for Arctic Bioscan. That's a feature of this website, and share our activities on the land. So this is a screenshot from my profile. This was a trip I did with my guides from the community. As you can see, it tracked us. We did an ATV ride from Cambridge Bay to a river that I wanted to sample. I was able to tag everybody who was on this trip. I was able to tag the community, the project, any collaborators. So, and also we were able to post things like malaise traps that we had set up on the land, like things that people would see every day and be like, what the heck is that? So this was a really awesome avenue to share what we were doing. Other methods of knowledge mobilization. As I said, I work many contracts for Polar Knowledge Canada, which is part of the government of Canada, the feds. So I wrote a blog post and it was shared on the Government of Canada website. Part of community relationships means you're not a scientist all the time. You're also a person. And I was able to host or lead a beading workshop in the Kitikmeot Friendship Society building, which was an amazing opportunity. And it was really nice to sort of step out of the work I was doing as an academic and just be present. And a big part of knowledge mobilization I'm finding is social media. So with social media, people can contact you very, very easily. And it's worked out amazingly for me because I had community members reaching out to me this past summer saying, hey, Dani, I remember you said you're working on this subject. What's going on? And they'll send me pictures or updates on what they're seeing on the land or experiencing. And these are things that I could never capture with sampling alone. So even if I don't have answers to questions people have, I'm in academia. I have a huge network of people who study a huge variety of disciplines, and it's a massive privilege. So, and also I have access to journals and things that are paywalled for people like members of the public. So I'm able to connect people with experts who can answer their questions. And it's also worth mentioning that many, many studies on northern environments or even northern people are behind paywalls that I can access that people from the community can't, and they might never see or hear the results of. All right, a huge part of knowledge mobilization is engaging youth. And I created and led multiple workshops while I was in Cambridge Bay this past summer. So I contacted a local organization and I asked them, how do you think I could facilitate a youth workshop? And they decided the best way would be to integrate my workshops into their already existing day camps for local youth that are land and culture based. So I called it What's in the Water Freshwater Biodiversity Workshops. I partnered with the Kitikmeot Friendship Society. My workshops were incorporated into existing day camps called Girls Club and Nuna Buddies, and Nuna means land. And one really important thing is to ensure that you have refreshments and food at all your community events. I really wanted to share some more photos from these workshops because they were so awesome. So there's a member of our department, Shelby Bone. She's an incredible artist and scientist and person. And I commissioned her to create custom coloring sheets for kids in my workshops. So I sent her photos of invertebrates that I had collected around Cambridge Bay. I sent her photos of the habitats that I found them in. And you can see on the bottom right corner, she created these amazing coloring book pages that were customized to Cambridge Bay. In the middle, you can see a jar with a sticker of a beetle, a diving beetle on it. Before I came back to Cambridge Bay, I went online and I purchased a whole bunch of bug stickers from Redbubble, from a scientist who is also an artist. And so I was able to give stickers out to the kids. I let them take home their jars. Often there were still invertebrates in them. I also let them take home transfer pipettes and plastic forceps. And I got reports weeks later from community members saying, hey, my cousin is still collecting invertebrates and he brings home bugs every day to show his parents and he's so excited about it. Things like that. So I was able to facilitate learning beyond the workshop itself by providing equipment and tools for students or youth to continue being excited about things after. And also what was really cute, they had a Pride Month wall here and they used some of Shelby's art to color in rainbow and post for Pride. So I thought that was really sweet. Another way of knowledge mobilization, I did a public talk at the Canadian High Arctic Research Station. Polar Knowledge Canada facilitated it, and they also provided refreshments and shuttle service to and from town. So essentially I did my little talk and I had set up some microscopes and caught some live specimens to share with people who came. I also printed off community reports and they were gone. Like everybody wanted, people want to know what's going on their land. And it's so easy to disseminate information this way because people are just excited about it. And what was really fun about this talk was there's this young person here in Plaid, and this person had actually been to one or both of my freshwater workshops. And I saw them in the audience. And instead of me walking everybody over to the microscopes, I said, hey, I remember you. And I know you're awesome with the microscope and you're really excited about identifying invertebrates. How about you lead the microscope portion? And so this youth went over and started catching bugs and showing the adults how to use the microscope and stuff. So it was really cool. Number 5, acknowledging contributions. As I mentioned, knowledge is a gift. It comes in a variety of forms. So all contributions, whether it's Western scientific, academic, or not, it must be acknowledged and appreciated. Keep in mind that other ways of knowing are valid and important. As I mentioned before, I'm trying to work towards including community members as authors. And in this way, I can honor the information that they're sharing with me, which again is a gift. And it's really important to remember all the time that our work in the North would not happen without the goodwill of the Inuit. And I didn't come up with the template for my report, for the community report myself. I had to ask, and I asked other researchers who do community-driven work to share, because if all of us keep going to community members to explain these things, that is emotional labor that they shouldn't really have to do if there are other resources for us to find out this information. And one really important part of community work is gift giving. And they're depending on, cultural context or region context, that could look, it could look different in different communities. And the people that I came up with, I went up to Cambridge Bay with people from Guelph, and I thought it was really thoughtful, that they brought honey from the Arboretum, tea from the John McCrae house, things like that, that are specific to where they came from. Number 6, other ways to enhance knowledge mobilization. Obviously, there's a time and a place for conferences and manuscripts, but it's important to remember that these are inaccessible to most people, whether it's cost or content or the language used. As I mentioned, social media has become really important for my work. Podcasts are a really great way to disseminate knowledge. Media interviews are also very useful. Public talks. So recently I've done talks to local high schools. I did a seminar for the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society. This is a great example, these departmental seminars. And something I found out really fast when I started going to Cambridge Bay is that a lot of people use Facebook. And so I was able to share results and progress to the community at large on their community Facebook page. Number 7, participating respectfully in the community. And the first thing I thought of when I was considering what this might look like is doing value-based work rather than deliverable-based. So valuing relationships and trust and reciprocal knowledge exchange. It's a good idea to brush up on local culture before you arrive and acknowledge before you get there that the way of life there will probably be different than yours, and that's okay. It's important to accept feedback or corrections from community members. If an apology is needed, apologize. Learn and move on. And lastly, don't let the fear of mistakes keep you from interacting with the community. I just wanted to share this. So when I was in Cambridge Bay this year, I was speaking with some community members, and one lady in particular mentioned how she was spearheading the high school graduation. It's not something the school really does. So she wanted to make sure the grads had this big party with catering and, that they felt like they were being celebrated for their accomplishment. And I recognized right away that living in the South is a huge privilege. I have access to everything. I can get things shipped to me for relatively cheaply and quickly. So I offered to support her, and I got lots of donations from all kinds of people. And I shipped up a ton of decorations, suits, dresses, jewelry, shoes, everything. So I just wanted to share this photo because, yeah, a lot of this stuff were things that I shipped up thanks to a lot of people who donated. All right, so just starting to wrap this up, my next steps are honoring commitments to communities based off of what they asked me. And this is a problem with a lot of research. I can't afford to fly to communities to speak to everybody in person. However, I'm really lucky. I have colleagues and friends that are traveling to a bunch of communities within Kitikmeot this month. And I created these resources so that they could consult the HTOs in my behalf. And to reiterate, if any community says they're not comfortable with this work, or they're no longer interested, I'm not going to continue with it. Key takeaways from this talk. Number 1, we're all people first, and we're scientists second. And I've heard this advice many times, and it just means to introduce yourself in community as a person. And this was advice I first heard from Shoshana Jacobs. And they had mentioned that when they're in community, they introduce themselves as someone who works at the University of Guelph. And when I'm in community, I often just introduce myself as a student who works at the field station. Number 2, be accessible. So whether that means distributing your cell phone number, your email, social media. Consulting with locals is so important. And it means that you're going to be taking steps against assuming what people want or need. You should allow community members to take as much or as little of an active role as they wish. It's really important to appreciate all contributions to your work, even if they're not purely academic or Western scientific based. Remain open to reciprocal knowledge exchange, and you will learn so much more about your research, and your research will be a lot stronger. Building positive relationships that are, you know, there should be trust, there should be equity. And lastly, learn ethical research practices in Indigenous communities. They will be different in every community, every nation. And for Inuit, some really good resources were the SciQ paper and the IIC. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate that everybody took some time to be here today. And I'm just going to share some of my information, speaking about being accessible. If anybody has any questions, I would be happy to take them. Oh, I think you're muted.
I am, because it's only like the third year I've been doing this. I see the emojis have already popped out. Please, if you feel comfortable opening up your camera to old school, first generation clap, that's amazing stuff. Emojis all around. So valuable. Everybody who is here, use the chat if you're somewhere where you can't ask your question out loud. If you are somewhere where you can, throw your hand up and Dani can respond. The unmuting is open. I see one in the chat from Cassie. Is there anywhere we can find and read your thesis?
Very good question. I am not done it yet. So yeah, I still have about a year left, and I'm currently working on my first chapter manuscript, and hopefully in the next year, I'm going to start putting out more of that community driven work. Because like I mentioned, my first two chapters were like, there was a complete absence of community and community needs. So yeah, I'm going to be getting more into the work that I'm doing with co-creating knowledge with community a little bit later. But I just have to get through the first two chapters first.
So I hope, Dani, as you're sitting there, you can scroll through some of the chat. I do see that I have